of the first Russian university, library, theatre, public museum, and a relatively independent press.
Catherine II of Russia was not only an admirer of Enlightenment, but she was an admirer, friend, and patron of men like Voltaire and Diderot, the leading exponents of the Enlightenment.
Like other enlightened despots, Catherine the Great played a key role in fostering the arts, sciences, and education. Catherine the Great was born Sophie Auguste Frederick. She was a German princess. In 1745, she married Grand Duke Peter of Holstein, heir to the Russian throne. The marriage was an unhappy one, but the intelligent and ambitious Catherine soon managed to build a group of supporters in St. Petersburg. She took the name of Catherine and became a member of the Russian Orthodox Church. She learned the language and customs and learned about the court. Catherine's husband succeeded to the throne as Peter III in 1762. Erratic, unstable, and contemptuous of Russian subjects, he soon alienated several important groups in Russian society. On July 9, 1762, the Imperial Guards overthrew Peter III and placed Catherine on the throne.
Recently, historians like Olwen Houghton have questioned the legitimacy of this person-centric understanding of Russian history. They contend that this is artificial and counterproductive. It is necessary to depersonalize history in order to understand the core of continuity in Russian history. It is certainly true that the major policies initiated or pursued by Catherine, like centralization of the strong state, expansion of Russia, or an augmentation of the power of the nobility, had all been initiated earlier. Yet, when we have a strong and despotic ruler, this focus on the person is probably not without a certain appropriateness. The point, however, is to try and see to what extent the policies were indeed inspired by any loyalty to Enlightenment other than paying some lip service to the new ideas.
Catherine the Great grew popular by minimizing her European connections and focusing her support of Russia. Yet, while she sought to minimize her connections to Europe, she also tried to continue westernizing Russia as Peter the Great had done. She wanted to bring the Enlightenment to Russia and admired the French philosophers. She also read authors such as Voltaire, Diderot, and Montesquieu. Catherine corresponded extensively with Voltaire and Denis Diderot. She gave financial support to them and a number of other French writers and played host to Diderot at her court in 1773. Influenced by these philosophers, Catherine incorporated the Enlightenment ideas to rationalize and reform the administration of the Russian Empire.
Catherine wanted to introduce a new legal system in Russia. She appointed a law commission, and for this law commission, she issued a nakaz or directive. In this, she quoted liberally from philosophers like Montesquieu, Beccaria, and others. And it has been seen by many as a very significant document. In this, she wanted to underline the basic principles of a monarchy without indeed despotism. provide a sophisticated rationale for monarchy. But this did not ultimately materialize, as the war with Turkey disrupted the work of the Law Commission. So the laws were indeed never enacted.
She ruled through a series of functional colleagues headed by presidents who worked in cooperation with an appointed administrative senate of 20 or 30 people. The Senate possessed no legislative powers. Catherine kept the power to herself to pass laws. Catherine also encouraged the publishing of numerous books and periodicals, including satires on Russian court life and the nobility. Catherine was a patron of the arts. However, in spite of all her liberal ideas, Catherine was dependent on the nobility for her power. She knew that they had helped her come to power and that if she did not satisfy them, they could plan a coup against her. As a result, during her reign, Catherine improved the lives of the nobility while decreasing the status and rights of the peasants and serfs. Many of Catherine's contemporaries questioned her adherence to Enlightenment ideas and thought that she was an egoist who merely used concepts from the age of Enlightenment to further her selfish gains. Contemporaries interpreted her personality as combining masculine strength with feminine vanity. Russia produced more goods and enlisted thousands of troops during Catherine's reign, while she acquired new lands, including Crimea and Poland, updated the army, and supported burgeoning manufactures. She really wanted to westernize Russia by reforming Russia and qualitatively improving the lives of the gentry. Bringing Russia to an equal level with the rest of Europe intellectually was a major concern of Catherine's. For this reason, she created laws that justified her rule. One of the first controversial things Catherine did was to secularize the church lands. The Metropolitan protested and excommunicated those involved with the process. However, others in the church did not support the excommunication, and the Metropolitan eventually lost his position. Catherine promoted local government and created governing districts. In 1785, the Charter to the Nobility was passed. This recognized the gentry of each province as a group with an elected leader that could directly petition Catherine. The Charter of Nobility also restored previous rights and privileges of the gentry. The gentry were free from obligations to the state and from taxation. They also gained greater property rights. They were the sole owners of their estates and gained much more control over the serfs.
There were two kinds of serfs in Russia. The obroks, who paid a cash rent, and the barshchina, who paid by labor.
Catherine showered her supporters with titles, offices, state lands, and serfs to work in their fields. Thus, despite her professed abhorrence for serfdom, Catherine did much to expand serfdom by transferring state-owned serfs to private landowners, extending serfdom to newly acquired territories and greatly expanding the legal control of the gentry over their serfs.
There was a middle rank called the odnovodci, who were between the nobles and the serfs, but these men had limited tenurial power and were not allowed by the nobles to keep serfs, and they resented this.
During this time, the poor and the serfs lost much of their privileges.
An event that was in a way a defining moment in Catherine's reign pretty early on was the rebellion of Pugachev. It was a peasant rebellion which involved obviously the serfs, who constituted an absolute and overwhelming majority of the Russian peasantry. What they wanted was to change this system gradually. The serfs suffered and they had to pay more. They did not have much of a liberty. Indeed, the landlords wanted to extend the restrictions on the serfdom and to try and extract their labor even more. They were the Bashkirs in the Urals, or the Cossacks. The Bashkirs were forced to work in the mines in the Ural region, and the Cossacks were forcibly taken into the army. The peasants resented serfdom, they resented the taxes collected by the feudal lords and the state, they resented the salt monopoly, and they resented the loss of fishing rights in the river. This was particularly true of the Cossacks.
Revolts occurred. The most famous and largest of the revolts was led by Cossack Emelian Pugachev and lasted from 1773 to 1775.
And Pugachev provided the leadership to bring in ultimately as many as 4.5 million peasants into a massive rebellion. Their demands were simple: abolition of serfdom, stopping the system of forcibly recruiting the Cossacks in the army, restoration of the fishing rights of the peasants in the rivers, abolition of salt monopoly, and reduction in the amount of taxes.
The Pugachev rebellion spread much along the Volga basin and the Urals.
The rebellion was ultimately crushed by the Russian army.
Pugachev was captured and brought to Moscow, where he was dismembered and burned. The revolt marked a turn towards a more reactionary internal policy. The Cossack army was disbanded, and other Cossacks were granted special privileges in an effort to transform them into loyal supporters of the autocracy.
But this rebellion did mark a watershed in her reign. It demonstrated the absolute need of rationalizing the administration, of introducing certain kinds of reforms. But it would be seen that while introducing these reforms, what Catherine succeeded in doing was to increase the power of the nobility.
In 1775, a major reform of provincial administration was undertaken in an effort to ensure better control of the empire.
She started with administrative changes and administrative reforms. She divided Russia into 50 gubernai or provinces, and the provinces were further subdivided into districts.
She established 50 guberni provinces divided into 10 districts. 300,000 to 400,000 people lived in each province, and 20,000 to 30,000 lived in every district. A governor and a network of officials divided by executive, legislative, and judicial functions were ideally supposed to run each province. Catherine also wanted the gentry to play a role in local political affairs. A major reform of urban administration was also promulgated.
In 1785, she issued a noble charter, and this noble charter clearly determined the power of the nobles. And the nobles' power were indeed augmented now. The privileges of noblemen were increased and confirmed. And what did these include? These included protection of personal property, control over the serfs, exemption from the payment of taxes, freedom from any physical punishment. Thus, in effect, despotic monarchy became in a way dependent increasingly on the augmented power of the nobility. They became in a way an adjunct of the despotism. This was to be a major feature of Russia.
Criticism of the Empress's reforms abounded. Professor Simeon Desnitsky, a follower of Adam Smith, suggested that Catherine institute elections of a representative senate every 5 years. Mikhail Karashov used novels and poems to show that the duty of the autocrat was to transform from an enlightened absolute monarch to a constitutional or limited monarch.
But at the same time, she did introduce a proper bureaucracy to provide some kind of administrative modernization. There was a separate revenue department in 1773, and by 1788, she had a budget presented to her seeking to introduce modern fiscal methods in the management of finances. Some of her reforms had received the praise of historians, and indeed Morrison has called some of this as amounting virtually to an administrative revolution. Catherine did try, we must concede, the existing system in Russia, and in the process did achieve moderate success in certain areas.
Catherine worked to increase education in Russia. She created elementary and secondary schools and universities. She gave special emphasis on the education of girls. Girls studied not only dance, music, sewing, drawing, and household economy, but also law, mathematics, languages, geography, history, economy, architecture, science, and ethics. Her sub-commission on education concerned itself not with the subtleties of sciences, but with primary, secondary, and higher education in order to teach children the duties required of those who live in society. The sub-commission began its work in May 1768 and used English universities, the Prussian system of national education, and Irish school as models. The state then established free, co-educational high schools and primary schools in provincial towns in 1786. By 1764, district towns received primary schools. However, rural schools did not come into existence. Around 176,000 children passed through Russian public schools between 1786 and 1796. The intellectual climate in Russia was altered irrevocably. Catherine also established a medical commission in 1763, which helped to improve medical conditions in Russia. She led the way in vaccinating Russians by taking the first vaccine. She also wanted Russia to be able to produce its own medicines and surgical equipment.
Her dalliance with Enlightenment philosophy has been taken to mean that these reforms were inspired by Enlightenment or by the new ideas introduced by the philosophers. But this is what has been questioned by historians. To what extent her reforms were inspired by new ideas, and the extent to which they were inspired by the requirements of a strong centralized despotism is open to question. The consensus is that it was the latter, that is, the needs of the strong centralized state, that led her to introduce administrative reforms. Because we have seen that when it came to the condition of the serfs or the peasants, the dice was loaded heavily in favor of the nobility. The serfs were not only not given any concession or any relaxation in the heavy demand that the state and the nobility made of them, but serfdom was extended to areas where it did not exist earlier, like it was extended to Ukraine in 1783. Therefore, her lip service to Enlightenment has been seen by many to be nothing more than hypocritical. She said one thing and did another.
Catherine helped expand Russia through two Russo-Turkish wars, one from 1768 to 1774 and the other from 1787 to 1792. Because she had gained significant diplomatic power in the early 1770s, Catherine considered something called the Greek Project. This consisted of pushing the Turks out of Europe, but it also carried another more utopian aspect, reclaiming Constantinople from Muslim to Orthodox Christian rule. The Second Turkish War ended with Russia gaining the fortress of Ochakov and the Black Sea shore up to the Nestor River. The Ottoman Empire recognized Russia's annexation of Crimea. By declaring that Constantinople would one day belong to Christians, she also appeased the church, which still held significant influence in the 18th century. She wished to show Western Europe that her country would be a powerful presence in European political matters. Russian control of Poland-Lithuania was also greatly extended, culminating in the annexation of large tracts of territory in the three partitions of Poland. Catherine's partition of Poland was a blatant example of power politics. Russia invaded three separate times in 1772, 1793, and 1795, and divided the once important European state between itself, Austria, and Prussia.
One is reminded of Frederick's comment about her, that when they were partitioning Poland in 1772, Catherine was very reluctant, verbally at least, to take this. And Frederick is reported to have said, "Elle pleura, mais elle prend." She will weep, but she will take nonetheless. Now, this is a cynical view of Catherine, and historians share this.
The constitution of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was considered by Catherine as a Jacobin threat. So through the military expedition, she destroyed the Commonwealth. The French Revolution increased Catherine's hostility towards liberal ideas. Several outspoken critics of serfdom, such as Novikov and Radishev, were imprisoned. Catherine is said to have been planning to join the European coalition against France before her death on November 17, 1796. To understand the significance of Catherine's rule, one must look back on Peter the Great's reign. Peter established the idea of a reforming Tsar. He broke away from the old Muscovite concept of the Russian sovereign as a good Tsar. From his reign, all Tsars were judged by the standard of modernizing economics, society, politics, and cultural life, gaining influence abroad and leading Russia on secular Western European ideas. No longer did leaders paternalistically protect the Russian homeland. For the next 150 years, Russian rulers followed reform conservatism, which consisted of maintaining the state's power, fighting off fundamental change, and also adopting progressive changes that gave the autocracy a feature of liberalism, which was actually conservative in practice.
The Soviet historians later did find her rule to be rather reactionary and oppressive. Actually, she followed mainly the policy of her predecessors, and it is difficult to suggest that she really made very basic innovations. All her policies were directed primarily to the preservation of her power, her authority, and to increase the powers of the state. Yet, some of these reforms did work ultimately against the autocratic state. It is she who had allowed people to go out of Russia to receive education in Western Europe. The case of Radishev is particularly relevant. Radishev was permitted by the Queen to go to Leipzig University to study. He returned and became a champion for the ending the system of serfdom. He ultimately was against both autocracy and serfdom, and he was the first to go on exile to Siberia. Therefore, it can be said that the example of Radishev clearly brings out the contradiction